All right, guys, this is day two of our benchmark unit, unit one, about government
Hello,
for the people.
let's get started today with a video about Cesar Chavez. Press play.
All right, let's see if it works.
The signs say they're protesting for fairer wages. Dear Tim and Moby, why are we celebrating Cesar Chavez's birthday? Thanks, Jared. Cesar Chavez was a Mexican-American farm worker who led a campaign to improve the working conditions of millions of other farm workers. He was one of the greatest civil rights leaders of the 20th century. Chavez was born in North Gila Valley near Yuma, Arizona on March 31st, 1927. During the Great Depression, his family was swindled out of their home. They headed to California to find temporary work on farms. People who move around the country harvesting seasonal crops are called migrant workers. Chavez's family picked peas and lettuce in the winter, cherries and beans in the spring, corn and grapes in the summer, and cotton in the fall. Because they moved so often, Chavez went to more than 30 schools. No, a migrant farmer's life wasn't easy. It didn't pay much, and workers often lived in government camps without access to clean water or bathrooms. Kids had to switch schools all the time, and sometimes, in order to raise enough money to keep their families fed, they couldn't go to school at all. Well, sure, it's fun to get a day off from school every once in a while. But without a decent education, children of migrant workers couldn't learn the skills that could help them get better jobs. Young Cesar left school after 8th grade to work in the fields after his father was in an accident and could no longer work to feed the family. After serving in the Navy for 2 years, Chavez returned to field labor. Soon, he became the leader of a civil rights group for Latinos, who made up the majority of the farming labor community. Conditions for farm workers remained pretty bad, so eventually Chavez he just got fed up. A lot of other people were fed up too. In 1962, he and Dolores Huerta founded the National Farm Workers Association to improve wages and working conditions. It was a labor union, a group of workers who joined together in order to protect their rights. Because Chavez was influenced by the peaceful rebellions led by Mahatma Gandhi in India, he always used non-violent ways to get his point across. Like Martin Luther King Jr., another student of Gandhi, Chavez relied on 3 techniques: strikes, boycotts, and protest marches. All 3 of these came in handy in 1965. That year, the National Farm Workers Association joined up with a group of Filipino grape pickers striking in Delano, California. A strike happens when employees of a particular company all decide not to go to work. Well, yeah, usually it's a good thing to go to work. But a strike is a non-violent way for workers to demand things like better wages, safer working conditions, or more affordable health care from their employers. Companies don't want employees to strike because it costs money. So they'll often negotiate with strikers, and both sides will come to a compromise. Chavez also led a protest march from Delano to Sacramento, the California state capital. Well, protest marches show that people care about an issue, which can help convince leaders to pass new laws. Finally, Chavez helped convince millions of Americans to boycott grapes, to refuse to buy or eat them in support of the strikers. The strike he led finally ended in 1970, leading not just to better conditions for grape pickers, but also to more strikes and unions all over the country. It also caused a bunch of different labor unions to join up into the United Farm Workers, an organization that still works for the rights of farm workers today. Well, Chavez is best known for the grape pickers strike, but he worked for the rest of his life for the rights of farm workers and of Mexican-American immigrants. He died on April 23, 1993. Today, 8 states recognize his birthday as a holiday, and cities all over the country have named streets, schools, and other buildings after him. Maybe we should find a different store.
Now read the rest of It Is My Right on pages 16 to 19 in Government for the People.
Luther King Jr. It is my right to speak out. Rosa Parks's actions made many people take action, too. Other women called for a boycott of the Montgomery city buses. They would unite in their fight against Jim Crow laws. They asked people to walk for one day. The bus boycott was a nonviolent protest. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a leader in the African American community, thought the boycott was a good idea. King believed in changing things peacefully. The one-day boycott was a success. The city buses were almost empty. Then Rosa Parks was found guilty of not obeying the law. King became the leader of a group that called for a longer boycott of the city buses. For 381 days, most African Americans refused to ride the Montgomery city buses.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Wright, and Reverend Ralph D. Abernathy, Center, were arrested for their part in the boycott.
When Martin Luther King Jr. spoke, people listened. He talked about how Black Americans and white Americans were treated differently. His words made some people angry. During the bus boycott, someone threw a bomb at his house. King continued to speak out for peaceful change. He took action, too, leading marches and helping people vote. On August 28, 1963, Dr. King gave one of his most important speeches. Standing in front of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., he looked out at 250,000 people. They had marched to the nation's capital to ask for more jobs and more freedom. Dr. King spoke about his dreams. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character.
Millions of people also saw the March on Washington speeches on television.
Cesar Chavez. It is my right to organize. Dr. King's words and actions inspired Cesar Chavez. Chavez grew up working in the fields in California. He and his family were migrant workers. They worked long hours and earned very little money. Families moved often to find work. Children could not stay in one school. Cesar Chavez decided to do something to improve farm workers' lives. He started a group called the National Farm Workers Association, NFWA. For several years, Chavez and others traveled across California. They tried to convince farm workers to join their group. People had tried to organize a farm workers group before. Promises had been made that their lives would be better. Those promises had not been kept. Then grape growers in Delano, California, started paying their workers less money. The workers went on strike. They refused to work. Cesar Chavez and the members of the NFWA voted to support the striking farm workers in Delano. The strike went on for several years.
Cesar Chavez. More than 14 million Americans stopped buying grapes to support the striking farm workers. Chavez is applauding the signing of a new farm workers union contract with the grape growers.
Cesar Chavez went on a hunger strike to show his support for the farm workers. He also wanted people to remember that the farm workers were carrying out a peaceful protest. For 25 days, Cesar Chavez didn't eat. The strike in Delano ended in 1969. Workers in the grape fields received more pay and other important rights to protect their health and safety. Alice Paul, Rosa Parks, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Cesar Chavez worked for important causes. They helped change America. Women won the right to vote. African Americans won the right to be treated equally. Farm workers won better working conditions. Today, people continue to fight to make sure everyone has equal rights.
Reread the rest of It Is My Right on pages 16 to 19, but this time, underline key details that you find. Be careful only to underline the need to know details, not the nice to know details.
Okay, so now we're gonna annotate the section about Martin Luther King Jr. Okay, you can do that with me together, and then we're gonna annotate the one that says about Cesar Chavez. You're gonna do that by yourself. Okay, remember to look for key details that are need to know. All right, need to know details, and how that will help you figure out the main idea. Okay, so we're gonna do the section about Martin Luther King Jr. first. Okay, and then we're gonna underline key details. Okay, and then you'll do the other 2 pages on your own. Okay, about Cesar Chavez. It says Rosa Parks' actions made many people take action too. Other women called for a boycott of the Montgomery City buses. They would unite in their fight against Jim Crow laws. They asked people to walk for one day. Does that paragraph share anything about Martin Luther King Jr.? No. So I can move on to the next one. Okay. It says the bus boycott was a nonviolent protest. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a leader in the African American community, thought the boycott was a good idea. King believed in changing things peacefully. Okay. I think this was is a detail that I need to know. Okay. How do you want to change things? You want to change things peacefully without any violence, right? You don't want to beat anybody up. All right. Um, yeah, I mean, you could also say that he was a Dr. Martin Luther Jr. He was a leader in the African American community. That's also a good detail that you want to know. Okay. All right. Paragraph 15 says the one-day boycott was a success. The city buses were almost empty. Then Rosa Parks was found guilty of not obeying the law. King became the leader of a group that called for a longer boycott of the city buses. For 381 days, most African Americans refused to ride the Montgomery City buses. Okay, so okay, a boycott, okay, is something that you don't do anymore. That affects a business. Okay, so what do they not do? Yeah, for 381 days, most African Americans they did not ride those Montgomery City buses. If people don't ride buses, they can't make money, right? Okay. Flip it over. We're going to paragraph 16. Okay. It says when Martin Luther King Jr. spoke, people listened. He talked about how black Americans and white Americans were treated differently. His words made some people angry. During the bus boycott, someone threw a bomb at his house. King continued to speak out for peaceful change. He took action. She took action too, leading marches and helping people vote. Okay. So, what are some details here that actually tell me a little bit more of how he demonstrated it peacefully? Aaron? Yeah, he still did it peacefully because look, he took action that was leading to marches and helping people vote, okay? Even though it made some people angry and stuff, that's a nice information, not something that I need to know. But what I need to know is that his actions led to marches and helping help people vote, okay? On August 28th, 1963, Dr. King gave one of his most important speeches, okay? So I think that's important because actually that's a date that is important to his life, okay? And the picture at the bottom, that's where this is where he's at in Washington D.C. giving his speech, okay? So it says standing in front of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington D.C., he looked out at 250,000 people. They had marched to the nation's capital to ask for more jobs and more freedom. Okay. So what was the reason for them doing this? See, they marched to the nation's capital to ask for more jobs and more freedom. So there was a purpose to this. Okay. And then the last part says Dr. King spoke about his dreams. I have a dream that my four little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of its character. Okay, I'm not going to underline the whole thing, but I am going to put a little mark right here like this with a star or an asterisk because that is kind of a little bit important information. Okay, especially this part right here. Look, I have a dream is how he started his speech.